The third argument against BDS is Israeli civil society organizations are largely progressive and at the vanguard of the peace movement, and therefore they must be supported, not boycotted. Well, this is simply a myth propagated, unfortunately, by many Israeli academics and intellectuals, as Ilan has mentioned, who count themselves in the left. The vast majority of Israelis serve in the occupation army and therefore directly know of or participate in the daily crimes committed by this army in the occupied territories. Moreover, with the exception of a tiny yet crucial minority, Israeli civil society is largely opposed to full equality of the Palestinians in Israel even, and is supportive of the state's racist oppression or is acquiescently silent about it. A second set of arguments against BDS. First, some observers have argued that boycotting Israel is counterproductive, and may lead to losing the ability to influence Israel's possible path to peace. What influence? Europe hardly has any influence right now. Even the US, the Israelization of US foreign policy, particularly vis-à-vis the Middle East, has reached new depths, effectively tying the hands of any prospective American pressure aimed at curtailing, not to mention changing, Israel's oppressive policies. A second argument is boycott would radicalize the Israeli right and weaken the Israeli left. This is an argument we always hear, particularly in Europe. What left? What's left of the Israeli left? The Zionist left in Israel staunchly opposes the rights of Palestinian refugees. They oppose full equality of Palestinian citizens of Israel, most of them at least, and they're mostly against full withdrawal from the occupied territories, particularly in East Jerusalem. Compared to this left, the far-right parties in Europe would look quite liberal. On the other hand, the morally consistent non-Zionist left is a very tiny group whose members may inadvertently end up losing benefits, privileges, and funding as a result of boycott, indeed. This should compel us, however, to nuance our boycott, to decrease the possibility of that unnecessarily happening. The third argument against BDS is that boycott would indirectly increase the suffering of Palestinians who stand to lose financially and may even be subjected to deteriorating conditions of oppression by a wilder, more isolated Israel. More suffering after the wall, the hundreds of roadblocks, the routine killings, the house demolitions, the bulldozing of 1 million trees, the imprisonment of thousands, the massive colonial growth. What else can Israel do to us and get away with it? Now to the final argument against BDS, and perhaps the most effective argument used to date to attack BDS, is that related to anti-Semitism and the Holocaust legacy, particularly in Europe, the home of the Holocaust. As the French philosopher Etienne Balibar says, quote, and the injustice that have ensued since the Holocaust. As to the anti-Semitism charge, the absolutely strongest point mentioned against BDS, I believe it's patently misplaced and clearly used as a tool of intellectual terror in Europe and even in the US. It's hardly worth reiterating that BDS does not target Jews or even Israelis as Jews. It is strictly directed against Israel as a colonial power that violates Palestinian rights and international law, period. The growing support among European and American Jews, and even some tiny minority of Israeli Jews, for various degrees of boycott is also indicative of the bankruptcy of this form of bullying. Furthermore, BDS does not preclude joint Palestinian-Israeli cooperation, as is done here in Belaim, as long as such joint projects are explicitly directed against Israel's oppressions and do not in any way preclude or mitigate the inalienable rights of Palestinians to self-determination. Peace industry projects, which Amira has mentioned, clearly do not qualify for this. It is not enough to call for peace, for peace without justice is equivalent to institutionalizing injustice. Peace projects which deliberately omit any mention of Israel's oppression of the Palestinians are nothing more than harmful and corrupt business ventures. those who imagine they can wish away this concrete colonial conflict by suggesting some forms of rapprochement, détente, or dialogue are clinically delusional or dangerously deceptive. Attempting to change the perception of the oppressed rather than help end oppression itself is an indicator of moral blindness and political short-sightedness. Prolonging oppression is not only unethical, it is pragmatically counterproductive as well, as it perpetuates the conflict. Finally, with their principled and effective support for this minimal, civil, non-violent form of resistance to oppression, international civil society organizations will be honoring their moral obligation to stand up for right, for justice, for true peace, and for equality, and for a chance to validate the prevalence of universal ethical principles. Only thus will this wall and the entire apartheid system that stands behind it fall. Thank you.